How many people were in the earlier session I delivered? All right, so that's about, I don't know, that's probably about 35%. So you'll see two slides that are similar. I'm going to try to go through them a little differently, just so I can change things up for you. But this particular session is quite a bit different than my other session. My other session is the session that I delivered at Ernst & Young to help grow that program from 6 people to 160,000 people. This session, so that's more fun and moving around, doing a lot of stuff, more sort of infotainment, if you will. This session is more technical, right? I'm going to go through, it's practical. What are the steps that we went through? What were the do's and don'ts? What are the tips and tricks? Just because, look, I want you all to be successful. It's my highest aspiration that whatever role you are in a company in terms of building mindfulness, I want you to be successful. We were fortunate that we were successful internally. Obviously, we were externally trained, but internally growing this thing. And so wherever you happen to be in that path, I'm hopeful that you'll take something away from this that you can pull back into your organization and maybe not hit a pothole that we hit, or maybe sort of get to where we got more quickly. In terms of the agenda, I'm not going to take a lot of time on agenda. If you want to snap picture, go ahead. I want to spend as much time as I can really sharing real information with you. In terms of who am I, in terms of my mindfulness journey, right? Most of us who bring mindfulness to organizations are practitioners. So I'm going to try to go through this much more quickly than I did this morning. So raised by a single mother of 3, grew up on welfare, lived in government subsidized housing for much of my childhood, got toys from Toys for Tots, other charities. And that part of my life, I'm not bummed about it. I don't regret it. That's really what got me connected to mindfulness in the first place. My mom entered me into a contest to win access to free martial arts lessons in my hometown. And I was one of the 5 lucky kids who won there on the right-hand side, about 11 years old. I learned 3 mindfulness skills in that program that absolutely changed my life once I started to apply them. First thing I learned was how to become mindful of unhelpful internal dialogue. The internal thoughts that say, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not tall enough, rich enough, whatever enough, to even attempt to do the things I was interested in. So learn to become mindful of that unhelpful internal dialogue and move forward despite it. Second thing I learned was how to become mindful of fear. So learning how fear shows up in the body physiologically, learning how it shows up in the mind, and learning to move forward despite the experience and presence of fear. And then the third thing was all about focus and concentration. Learning to keep my attention where I wanted it to be, as opposed to where the distracting world wants it to be every single day. And I took those 3 skills and moved forward in my life, and definitely didn't apply them right away. Didn't apply them in high school. In high school, I was worried about making money, not making good grades, so I barely graduated. But I did. You can check. I graduated on a Friday, and I was in the Army on Monday, like 2 days off. I had always wanted to be in the military. I came from a military family. And the day I left for the military, I learned something about myself that day. I learned that I was absolutely terrified of heights and of flying. So first time I'd ever been on a plane. I don't mean typical nervousness you might feel the first time you fly. I'm talking about white knuckling the armrest, heart pounding out of my chest, sweat beading. Clearly I got through that. I'm here today as proof. But this was something I realized I was going to have to face and overcome if I was going to explore the world the way I'd hoped and dreamed about. Well, my first assignment, I don't know if you know much about the military, but my first assignment after basic training was a place called Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And this is what they do at Fort Bragg. They jump out of planes a lot. And so very shortly after joining the military, I had the opportunity to volunteer to go to airborne school, face that fear. And I learned through that process is when you can feel that level of fear in the body and in the mind, move through it and be okay on the other side, there's no goal that's out of reach. Now, this is 3 years into the military. I decide that I'm going to re-enlist. I see the re-enlistment officer, and she lists a whole bunch of jobs the Army has a need for. And one stood out as being very interesting to me. And that job was Chinese linguist. Okay. Now, if you think the kid who barely graduated high school had some unhelpful internal dialogue about his intellectual capabilities, you'd be right. First thought I had when she offered me that opportunity was, hey, buddy, don't you remember? You failed high school English. Your native language. Do you really think you can learn one of the most difficult languages on the planet? And I did something that day that I now call catch and release. And I wrote about it in my book, Mindfulness Without the Bells and Beats. And I caught the fact that I was having this unhelpful internal dialogue. And as soon as I caught it, I was temporarily released from the influence it had over me. Catch and release. I don't know if I'll talk about that later, but if you ask me about it, I can. So once I was past that internal dialogue, I decided to try to do the thing I was interested in. So I signed a dotted line. They sent me to Monterey, California, where I studied Chinese for 63 weeks, 10 hours a day. Surprised myself by graduating from that program with honors. And I started to get the sense that maybe I was the type of person who could go to college someday. Nobody in my family had ever been to college. So I started to take college classes in my different military assignments around my career and eventually wrapped them all up into an online undergraduate degree at Bellevue University in Nebraska. Now, this is about 10 years into the military. I decided to leave the active duty and join the Department of Defense as a civilian. Now, where do you think the U.S. Department of Defense sends Chinese-speaking civil servants? What country? No. India? Afghanistan. Okay. So I deployed to Afghanistan. I come back, deployed to Iraq, and then I went to the Joint Military Attaché School, which is a school where you learn to become a diplomat. And then I was assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, China. And so if you look at the arc of my life, poor kid, wrong side of the tracks, learns Chinese, gets educated. To be able to get to that position in my life was really the pinnacle of my career. And so you would think that I was on top of the world. And I was. When I got to Beijing, I was on cloud 9. But it only took me a few weeks before I started to recognize I was surrounded by a bunch of amazing people who had the most interesting lives, who went to the best Ivy League schools, and they would get asked questions about U.S.-China policy, and their responses were brilliant. And I quickly started to feel like these folks are going to figure Clif out. They're going to realize he didn't come via the same path. Somebody's going to ask me a hard question. I'm not going to know the answer. Certainly not the way they knew it. So it really sapped my self-confidence. I started to feel like an imposter. And so when a colleague of mine suggested that I apply to Harvard when I was thinking about going to graduate school, I told him it was out of his mind. I was like, you know me pretty well, but maybe you don't know I barely graduated high school. And in the quietest whisper I could come up with, I shared with him that I got my undergraduate degree online. And I went to school online before it was cool. And I'm not sure if it's cool yet, despite 2 years of everybody doing everything online. But I told him I don't want to waste my time or my money on something that's absolutely impossible. Now, I don't know how you determine success and fulfillment for yourself. I certainly don't think success is just achievement after achievement. We could have a whole discussion about that. But I certainly had enough evidence in my life that just because something seems impossible or feels impossible, or my brain tells me it's impossible, doesn't mean it actually is impossible. Yet in that moment, that's exactly what my brain was doing. And I got curious about why. And what I've discovered is it's because our brains aren't designed to make us happy. Our brains are designed to keep us safe. And so what my brain did in that moment was predict what's the likely outcome of this endeavor. And it predicted failure. Well, what does failure equal? From our brain's perspective, failure equals pain. And so in an attempt to avoid that future pain, my brain served up the thoughts, the beliefs, and the impulses that would nudge me towards safety, towards inaction in this case, to keep me in my comfort zone. Well, our comfort zones are more like cages. Our comfort zones are where dreams go to die. Fortunately for me, my colleague asked me on a regular basis, "Should you apply? I think you'll have a chance." And finally, my catch and release system came online, and I caught the fact that I was generating this elaborate story about how I knew how all this was going to play out. I knew all the ins and outs of the admissions process, but essentially all I was doing, which is what a lot of us do, is I was just preemptively ruling myself out. I wasn't even allowing them to rule me out. And so as soon as I was released by the influence of that internal dialogue, I was able to at least notice the only thing I had absolutely any control over, which was to submit an application. So I applied, and much to my surprise, and many other people's surprise, I got accepted to Harvard. One of the most emotional days of my life, but long story long, I went to Harvard, got my master's degree from there, and as I reflected on that entire process, that's what inspired me to become an executive coach and a mindfulness teacher and an author on mindfulness, because it's such a powerful tool for helping us uncover and transcend our self-limiting beliefs and other psychological barriers to our success and our happiness. And so I wanted to share that with you so A, you know who I am, but B, so you can see maybe a slightly different view of mindfulness. Right? Mindfulness tends to be narrowly framed in sort of a well-being frame or a spirituality frame. And when it's that narrow, it can leave out some other ways that people could access it, like through leadership or performance. And as was said earlier on this stage, they may come to your class for one thing, they're going to leave with a lot of the other benefits. So what has EY done? So this is a quick snapshot of what we accomplished over from 2015 when we stood up the program to just this year, 31 June, I guess, or is when I left the firm. So I don't speak for EY. My replacement is right over here, and I'm going to introduce her, Kristen Conklin. She's a new global EY mindfulness leader. Couldn't ask for a better leader of that program. But it's just a snapshot, right? So our mindfulness network started with about 6 people around a dusty, conference room, and we had this idea of that we could impact 3 key aspects of our people. We could impact their performance, we could impact their leadership, and we could impact their well-being. And we'll talk about why we came up with that. What's the importance of addressing both sides? You've already heard this a couple times from the stage, the individual and the business. It's quite important. I'm not going to list off these numbers. You can take a photo of the slide, it's totally fine. Okay, so we had 3 foundational pillars. This is sort of what we wanted it to look like in the beginning, right? This was aspirational. This is, we didn't have any money. We didn't have any senior leader backing it at this time. This was like, what do we want it to look like? And we knew that we wanted to enable our people, but we want to offer the business. I don't know, is that cutting in and out? Yeah. If it keeps happening, maybe somebody. You want me to use this? Okay. All right. So we wanted to address the people, and we also needed to address the business, right? Businesses are in the business of staying in business. So we have to address those issues. It was mentioned. So we looked at how do we connect with our people? How do we develop our people? And then how do we embed this, right? It's not too difficult. I shouldn't say it's not too difficult. It can be in the realm of possible to really get motivated, get people motivated in 60 minutes and get them, wow, this is exciting. I want to learn about mindfulness. This is amazing. There's not a lot of change that happens in 60 minutes. Change happens in a longer period of time. And so how do we connect with them initially, and then how do we embed it? So we connect to our people through a variety of ways, right? Through SharePoint sites, Yammer, individual conversations. How do we connect to the business, right? So we connect to the business by sharing these KPIs that they're gonna reap through sponsoring us, working with us. So working with the recruiting team, working with the L&D team, other teams within your organization that would benefit from a business perspective can help you get resources, and we'll talk about that. And then clients on here. So at Ernst & Young, we do a lot of consulting, right? And so we have a lot of joint EY client teams. And so we can also help our clients be more mindful by offering training to both those sides in different engagements. In terms of developing, creating a suite of training that can address multiple sort of venues and access points, right? So from live local to virtual asynchronous to everything in between, right? From a 1-hour session to a 15-minute drop-in session to a podcast to an 8-week in-depth course that really leads to some change. And then in terms of embedding it in the business, embedding it in the system as well. So where are those access points? We can talk a little bit about that. So how do we get there? I think the first and most important thing to do is to develop a compelling introduction to mindfulness session, right? It can be 45 minutes, it can be 60 minutes, but that is one of the most, if not the most important thing, because it's not just a way to introduce people to mindfulness. It's 3 things in one, right? It's information about what mindfulness is. It is marketing to leaders who might be sitting in your audience. And it's also just awareness that these programs exist. So Ernst & Young, I don't know what they're up to now, but when I was there, it was 300,000 people, right? We taught mindfulness for 5 or 6 years, and there were people we would run into that still didn't know we had the program, although we reached, 160,000 people. That's a lot of people left. So it becomes an awareness tool as well. So again, three functions of that. Passing on what mindfulness is, marketing it to leaders who might be in the audience, and then awareness to the group. All right, so key things that you should do, my opinion you should do. Demystify mindfulness, right? There is so much hype about mindfulness. We were just over in Whole Foods, It took me about 10 seconds to find some kind of mindful product. There's mindful mayonnaise, mindful pistachio nuts, mindful magazine, right? There's just so much hype out there. So part of the initial session needs to give some airtime to demystifying it, right? Peel back the layers of hype to get to some of the core concepts. Addressing the elephants in the room. Many of them were actually already addressed on this stage. One of the first ones and big ones is this a religion, right? Depending on the culture of your company, they may not even want to get close to anything that smells like religion or spirituality. And so addressing that with the leaders, with individuals in the session, I think is quite helpful. That I think somebody up here, I mean, they'd say it much more in a much more articulate way, but that this type of silence, looking at what the mind is doing, is a part of all major religions and many, many secular philosophies, right? So getting that off the table, that what we're teaching or what you're bringing into the corporate world is not a religion. And then another elephant in the room is why. And the reason I say that, at least in my experience at Ernst & Young, I could be sitting, walking up on stage in front of 200 senior partners at this firm. Like, these people, by any measure on the planet, have been extremely successful people. Very fortunate. They're making, good decisions based on society's view of success, right? They're successful people. So there's going to be some folks in the audience like, why am I going to spend some time to add this to what is a pretty busy to-do list? And so addressing that by, VUCA is a thing that comes up. It's a volatile world. It's an uncertain world. I talk about the amount of distractions we're having. So there has to be something in your talk that really makes them feel that there's an aspect that they could gain from this. Because if they're making good decisions and have all these outward appearances of everything is going well, it's going to be tough to be like, no, just do it. You need it. You need it, right? Got to make them feel it. Science and benefits. In every session that I've done, I've always devoted at least one slide. Doesn't have to be deep, doesn't have to be detailed, but one slide that addresses that there is some science behind this, right? I found that Westerners typically won't do anything new unless a scientist or a celebrity says to do it, right? We're not celebrities in this, or maybe somebody in here is a celebrity. I'm not. And so pivoting and sharing some of the science is important. And it can't be hype, right? It can't be, there's this article that says meditate 1 minute a day and you're going to reap all these benefits, right? You got to be clear about, like, these things are correlation. It's not causation, right? Be very clear about that. Same thing with the benefits. Like, how are they going to put the benefits up front? Simple practices. Somebody said earlier, it's simple, but it's not easy. In the corporate world where these folks are working, insane hours, which is a problem that needs to be solved, offering them short practices that make sense within the context of what they're offering. Doing an MBSR program at night may be a little easier to do 45-minute meditations, right? With a corporate audience, that's not going to fly, right? So adjusting your course to meet the demands of your particular audience or group is really, really important. And then must nots. This might get me in trouble. All right. I would refrain from talking about your your invisible connection to the universe and how you have evidence that psychic powers are real in a corporate environment. I'm not saying that's not true. I'm just recommending not to say that to a corporate audience. The reason I say that is that it has happened at my firm, my previous firm. And when you have to walk that back, right, when there's a leader in that office, there are going to be people sitting in your audience, and their voices of judgment and voices of criticism are going to be running in the background. And that's probably happening right now in this group. Some people are so skeptical of this that they will take one thing from your presentation and use it to throw the whole thing out. And if those people are influential enough, if they're powerful enough, they can derail your entire program. And so Kristen can definitely say that when she came into the network, I was pretty rigid about this particular topic. Like, we have to make sure that we have the right people saying the right things in terms of, like, Here's like the bigoted words that you can't say. Here's the words you can say. And this goes for, religious focused words and things like that. I would say, so once you have that developed, take every opportunity you can to deliver this content, right? Whether you're asked to deliver it to 6 people or 60 or 2 people, just start to deliver it, because you never know when someone's going to be in that audience that can invite you to the annual milestones event to 6,000 people, right? And when you get that opportunity, if you've built the groundwork and you've done this for 10 people and 20 people and 60 people, when you deliver that one and the feedback to that event is better than the feedback, the $25,000 an hour speaker, they pay attention. All right. And so that's free, right? So they can, this one opportunity got our group connected to our learning and development leader, which totally changed the game. We'll talk about the importance of learning and development. Altruists, allies, and astrologists. Okay, this is important. So creating champions. Once you start to deliver this, and maybe some of you are already seeing this, you will have people start to come out, so to speak, like, oh, I've been meditating for a long time. I finally have a friend to talk to about this. So let's talk, right? So people are going to start coming out, and it's going to be a linear correlation between how many people you have in your organization and the number who come out of that, right? That's actually how I met Kristen. I delivered a session. She heard about it, and she emailed. Actually, we sent out an email. We'll talk about creating teachers. And so these will be your first champions. These folks who are like, I've been doing this for 25 years or 15 years. I never thought I could share about this at work, and I want to be able to bring my whole self to work, that kind of thing. Definitely these folks are like your first team. Right? It's important to have somebody championing it, like the main person, but nothing happens in a single person, right? These things take a group of people. Gaining allies. So those are a little bit separate from champions. If you have a senior leader who does that same thing, hey, Clif, I didn't think I could talk about this. I could talk about this with you. And that person's a senior partner. You might not want to suggest that they be a champion that's like helping, do spreadsheets for your membership list. That's a person that you might want to befriend in terms of getting them involved in more leadership and strategic aspects of how do you roll this out in their peer group, right? They can become sponsors, really. And then managing attempts to leverage the network. This happened at least every 3 months at Ernst & Young from 2015 up until the present time, is as someone will come to the network, particularly when it's rolling along and it's got a lot of support, that they want you to teach their thing, right? Whether it's numerology or neuro-linguistic programming, yoga, whatever it is, it's just something that isn't mindfulness. And you just have to make a concerted or a deliberate decision about, do you want to add this into your program? Is this going to dilute what you're trying to do? Or is it going to help what you're trying to do? Because if you're not expecting it, people will corner you, like might happen here, and say, hey, I wanted you to join to see if you would do this thing, and you're sort of put on the spot. So if you have a charter, this is what we do, can really help you sort of navigate those challenging conversations from time to time. All right. Getting budget and resources, stats that mattered. So the first stat that I think was important was just the sheer amount of research that was out there. And I think you can get some really good data from the American Mindfulness Research Association. They have a slide that they update every year. It's very useful for just highlighting at least the sort of the hockey stick of focus on mindfulness. Now, if you had that chart beside a chart about, research into fitness, it's not even going to be in the realm of this. It's not even the same universe. But by itself, it highlights that there's a lot more eyeballs on this problem. And again, Westerners don't do much unless a scientist says to, or a celebrity. So that sort of points to that piece of it. But also research specific to your industry. I think this was said earlier, right? Somebody mentioned about being a surgeon and how there was research specific to surgeons. I mean, who knew that was out there, like that it reduced surgical errors. I'm sure there's one for industrial production, accident reduction, things like that. So if you're in a particular industry, tailoring your research to your company seems like a good idea. Aligned with priority challenges. This is another one that came up. I think Rich Fernandez, mentioned this one. This is like, if you have a company that is having a problem with a toxic environment and they're trying to create empathy in there, that's one of their top priorities. And you know that that's a top priority. Aligning the research that highlights something similar, put that in your deck, right? It seems like common sense, but I've been in a lot of these types of conferences where it's not aligned. And when you have that alignment, the people who have to count the money and let the research dollars out, they're going to know that you sort of speak the language of business, and that you sort of quote unquote get it, and that would just engender a lot more trust in the beginning of this process for you. And then comparable companies. So I came from the big four most recently. There's four of them, right? They compete, right? So if you have a competitor, a Domino's and Pizza Hut, I don't know if they like, cut each other's tires or something, but in the big four, there's competition there, right? So if you know one of your competitors is doing something and it's having a measurable impact on the business, it doesn't necessarily hurt you to bring that up. Hey, Deloitte's been doing this and they're seeing this and their attrition rate is going down. That can also help your case. Now you got to do it tactfully, but it's really helpful for them to know, like, there's some social proof, right? There's a company that I know that I can identify with, not a company. If your company is a finance company in New York and you're trying to compare that with a fashion company in San Francisco, well, this fashion company in San Francisco is doing this. It's just not going to be as compelling as right down the street, Merrill Lynch is doing this. It's gonna mean a lot more. Transitioning an official learning and development curriculum. So I said earlier that I think the frame around mindfulness tends to be around well-being, and obviously it does a lot of good there. And I think because of that, most mindfulness programs have been sort of pushed into the EAP space, employee assistance programs, right? And it's done what it's done in there. I think somebody was in an earlier class that said EAP, was it you, ma'am? EAP is used about 14% by 14% of the population, right? And I think there are a number of reasons for that. One of them, I think some people just don't want to do something that might show that they need help. Like, hey, I need help, I'm going to go to EAP. And so we made the decision to put our program in the learning and development curriculum, Mindful Leadership, at our firm. Because it doesn't matter to us why they come to the program, right? If they want to come for the performance benefits, if they want to come for the leadership benefits, they're going to leave with the well-being benefits. Now, I'm not saying not to coordinate and collaborate with your EAP group. We have a great relationship with what we call EY Assist, where we cross-promote, right? So if the person's not willing or interested, maybe they are feeling a little stressed, but they don't want to, avail themselves of that service to talk to a therapist, and they're willing to, let me try mindfulness. Let me try this leadership thing because it does have this well-being comment on the end. That's great. We're giving them a larger sort of contact surface to engage with these programs that can really make a difference. So L&D, moving to L&D is useful, but there are some challenges, right? So you may have to adjust your program to meet with curriculum developers, right? So our firm is quite large, or my former firm is quite large. They have whole teams of curriculum designers and quality gates, and you've been teaching this out of your hip pocket for years, and you got to conform, right? And so there's a healthy tension there. I think one of the things that's interesting is, a lot of programs want to have testing at the end, right? When we're doing a mindfulness program, we're not testing you on the definition of mindfulness, right? We're not even testing you. We're just giving you trying to inspire you to do the practice. And so there's some give and take there that will be a part of that process. Making course changes. So I'm an MBSR teacher, also an SIY teacher. I can't have 3-hour classes at a corporate, the corporations that I've been working with. So I think we tried 60 minutes and then we went to 90 minutes, and we've done some executive versions, virtual, live. And so you have to adjust, right, to the audience and the time. We were fortunate that we were already delivering our 8-week course virtually when COVID happened. So we just needed to offer more offerings because we went from, 100 people a class to, can we do 4 250 people classes just to meet the immediate demand, right? So that kind of thing. This is an important one too. It's all brought up by multiple people. Um, a lot of people want to teach mindfulness. And again, when you're at a large firm, you're going to have people come out. I've been meditating, I've been doing meditation for, X number of years. Can I teach? Right. And if somebody's, recently been through any kind of program, MBSR, you can come out of these programs transformed, right? And immediately want to help others. And so I'm not going to tell you what to do, but coming up with a repeatable way to create internal facilitators, whether you're using an external vendor or whether you create an internal program, if your company could support that kind of effort, it's important that you do that, because when it's doing yoga for 6 years doesn't make me a yoga teacher, right? Meditating for 6 years, maybe not even doing mindfulness meditation, doesn't make one a meditation teacher, right? So, but again, you're going to have a lot of people asking to do that, right? So it's important to think about how you're going to do that. And then again, making it actionable, right? I think SIY does a great job of this, of like the minute to arrive with meetings, like make it actionable within the context of what they're doing, right? So if you're talking to a group of military members, it's going to be different for them than it is going to be a bunch of accountants. And so adjusting the context for those is really, really helpful. All right, perils, pitfalls, and potholes. How am I looking? Oh my goodness. Okay, I got to go faster. Everyone wants to be a champion. Again, this is that sort of, they just came out of your class, 8 weeks, and they're super motivated. They want to be a champion today, and they've had exactly 8 weeks worth of training, right? You have to have a way to onboard them and help them help you with a job that's really valuable to you, whether it's tracking data for sharing with the bosses, whether it's, managing the email account that takes in all the requests for training, right? Getting them involved so that they can help, feel like they're helping, but also they become a part of our community of practice. Same thing, I can teach mindfulness. This one can be controversial, removing things that could be, that are associated with mindfulness, but not necessary. And this is where the whole book came from, Mindfulness Without the Bells and Beads. Some people like bells and beads. I have no problem with bells and beads. They're used in many contexts, as are meditation cushions and candles and incense. But they're not required, right? They have context, but they're not required. And if you know that something is going to maybe add some baggage or have some challenges with uptake, it's just useful to pull that back. Folks will find that stuff if they want to, and it's okay for them to have it. It's just in the context of reaching the most people, being inclusive, reaching the most people as possible, taking some of that stuff away is very, very helpful. And then being clear about what mindfulness is and isn't. I think when coming to a conference like this, there's a lot of things going on. There's yoga going on. There's music, being aware of music. Maybe somebody's doing TM. There are a lot of things that sort of get lumped under this moniker of mindfulness, and whatever you're going to define it for your company should be defined, right? It shouldn't be just, because then you're going to have everybody coming to you say, hey, do my thing. My thing's mindfulness too. Neurolinguistic program, it's mindfulness, So if you can be clear about that it also can help, you narrow your focus in your mission so that you can be more successful. So key takeaways, I'm going to go through this quick. Introduction to mindfulness is the most important thing. Find those allies, and they're going to come out as soon as you start talking to them. Tie the benefits to the outcomes your company is already interested in achieving. Again, you don't have to convince anybody if it's already on the slide. Hey, you want to reduce unconscious bias? Here's this study that shows that mindfulness does this. So this is killing two birds with one stone. Build a network of champions and qualified teachers. It is, if you're at a company that has the resources to permanently or full-time dedicate someone to this effort, that's really, really helpful, right? We did it, I think, side of desk for probably 3 years before we had enough support to say, okay, Clif, do this full-time. And then keep your practice, right? You're not just the messenger, you are the message. How you show up in those meetings with your audience, with your colleagues, says a lot about what mindfulness is and how it can benefit them. And so it's really important that we keep up our own practice. And I'm going to stop there. I know we're already past for questions. Maybe we can do questions on the side, but I'm getting the hook. So thank you all. Sorry I didn't get to